days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new t-shirt.
It's your new t-shirt. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning. It's 9:30 on Tuesday, the 28th of November. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Bev Turner.
Royal Rumble. The journalist Omid Scobie has published his latest biography, Endgame, this morning. It has some scathing attacks on the royal family. Our royal correspondent Cameron Walker has the latest.
Royal racist, a scathing attack on the Princess of Wales' character, dubbed a character assassination by some. But how much should we believe of this book? Join us later for all the analysis.
And bridging divisions. Bereaved families from Israel and Palestine will lead a peace vigil in London on Sunday in an attempt to ease tensions on both sides of the Israel-Hamas war. One of the organisers, Brendan Cox, the widow of the murdered MP Jo Cox, joins us in the studio very shortly.
And the best Christmas ad. We showed it you yesterday. It's made by a pub in Northern Ireland. It's giving John Lewis a run for their money. For a fraction of the production costs, we're going to have the people behind the masterpiece on the show very soon. That and lots more this morning. We've got Christopher Hope down at Downing Street bringing us some political news as well. Let us know your thoughts. Lot to talk about. GBviews at gbnews.com. Give us your name. Let us know also where you're watching or listening from. First, though, here is the very latest news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Bev, thank you and good morning. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. A further 10 Israeli hostages are due to be released by the Hamas terror group today. It comes as a humanitarian truce between them has been extended for 2 more days. 11 Israeli hostages, including 8 children and 3 adults, were released from Gaza last night. 33 Palestinian prisoners were also released last night, and they were taken to an Israeli checkpoint near Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. A planned meeting between Rishi Sunak and the Greek Prime Minister has been abruptly called off. It's understood that Downing Street had been assured that Kyriakos Mitsotakis wouldn't raise the matter of the Elgin marbles, which is a sensitive diplomatic issue for Greece and the UK. Mr Mitsotakis and his team were reportedly left baffled, surprised and annoyed by the sudden cancellation. He was offered a meeting with the Deputy Prime Minister instead. However, he opted for a flight home. Well, meanwhile, the Prime Minister will chair Cabinet today amid warnings that ignoring international rules on Rwanda could delay flights. The aim of sending asylum seekers on a one-way trip to Rwanda forms a key part of his pledge to stop migrant boats crossing the English Channel. A ruling by the Supreme Court that the proposal is unlawful has seen the UK government look at measures to satisfy judges' concerns, like opting out of the ECHR. But it's now being reported the government has been advised that ignoring the ECHR risks opening up more avenues for migrants to challenge the legality of deportation flights. Shop price inflation has eased for the 6th month in a row as retailers compete fiercely for customers ahead of Christmas. According to the British Retail Consortium, shop prices were 4.3% higher than last November, down from October's 5.2% and the lowest inflation since last June. Food inflation overall slowed to 7.8% from October's 8.8%. The 7th consecutive drop and its lowest rate since last July, that being due to lower domestic energy prices, cutting costs, particularly for dairy products. And Omid Scobie's bombshell new book about the royal family has been published. Endgame has already reportedly been branded vicious and poisonous by royal insiders. Mr Scobie, who also co-authored a biography of the Sussexes, has said the Duke of Sussex and Prince of Wales' relationship is beyond repair. He has also claimed that King Charles, Queen Camilla and William conspired to undermine Harry and Meghan. Buckingham Palace have not commented on the claims. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now back to Andrew and Bev.
Very good morning, 9:34.
Well, it's called Endgame, and I think, does he think, Omid Scobie, that's the end of the royal family? Because it's just some of the revelations in his book. Let's say, not say revelations, claims in the book. He said there's scathing attacks. He's talking about Charles being told that Charles is a pampered royal, and he told the royals not to trust Prince Harry and branded him a fool over his Netflix documentary. He's right about that.
That's not really a revelation, is it?
No.
On Prince Harry, the book claims that he was kept in the dark about the late Queen's death, that he could be ready for reconciliation with his family, and he doesn't care about receiving an apology.
And Meghan Markle, she reportedly told the King there are 2 royal racists and that she does not want to return to England. Well, that's a relief.
Well, now, just a selection of some of the claims in the book. Cameron Walker is here to talk about it with us, because the thing that always strikes me about these stories, Cameron, this is a guy, Omid Scobie, he's got a name like a cartoon character, and he makes his living out of transferring tittle-tattle that we have to believe the sources of in order to cause hatred between the royal family. I don't know how he wakes up in the morning and looks himself in the mirror. What a job.
Well, I'm sure the book is going to make a lot of money because a lot of people are going to want to read it. Even if you despise Harry and Meghan, or even if you despise the working members of the royal family, either way, you're probably going to want to know the gossip that's in this book. Now, of course, Omid Scobie, I would suggest, has a lot more sources on the Sussex side of the conversation rather than working members of the royal family. And if, of course, you look back to Finding Freedom, which was the first book which he co-wrote, he insisted, and so did Meghan, that she did not collaborate with that book, but then she had to apologise to the High Court for forgetting that she briefed an aide, Jason Canal, former Communications Secretary, that she allowed him to speak to the 2 journalists who wrote the book. So there is history when it comes to collaboration.
And the book, I mean, I've not read it cover to cover yet, Cameron, but there is not a... It is the couple who comes out of it with shiny halos Harry and Meghan in their posh place in California. He is living up to his reputation. He is being used as their mouthpiece.
If you read the book, Harry and Meghan have not put a foot wrong in Omid Scobie's eyes, unlike every other member of the royal family, particularly the Princess of Wales, actually, who comes under a bit of a character assassination, according to Robert Jobson. Well, Omid claims that she's a part-time member of the royal family, and also said, which some people have taken real offence to this morning, actually, that Kate is the last shiny thing the royal family has. Which speaks volumes. Well, I think he's referring to the fact that whatever Kate does, she inevitably, in his eyes, ends up on the front pages of the newspapers or some newspapers without actually doing any proper work. That's the kind of narrative that's being portrayed in the book. I would argue...
What royals have done for years.
Yeah, but also I would argue there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes with her early childhood, these long-term projects, which, OK, every day is not going to make this sensationalist headline, but in the long term, it could make a real difference. So it's a different way, a more modern way of being a member of the royal family.
So have Harry and Meghan come out and endorsed this book publicly, or is it just this horribly fake kind of lack of authenticity that we know that it is a proxy, a version, basically, of their amazing contribution to the world, but they're not physically, outwardly endorsing it?
Yeah, I mean, the Independent newspaper, for example, quite a centre-left newspaper, says that the book's an unfailingly sympathetic view towards the Sussexes. Archwell, who's Harry and Meghan's communications team, have not commented on this book. It appears they're trying to distance themselves from it, as has Kensington Palace and Buckingham Palace, which...
Cameron, sorry to interrupt, they could distance themselves from it by saying we disassociate from it. In a public statement, we disassociate from it, we don't approve of it, this is not in our name, we regret the fact he keeps dragging us into it to make profit. But they haven't done that so far, and this book's been a long time coming. It's already out in Australia.
Yeah, and I would argue as well that with the publication of Spare and the Netflix series and everything else, the royal family's popularity has gone up, or at least stayed the same, apart from Harry and Meghan's, whose popularity has really suffered, both here and in the United States. So the victim narrative, which has been portrayed over the last few years as the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, appears to not be working.
They're the only ones who are challenging Prince Andrew in the unpopularity stakes, which is quite an achievement, isn't it? A man who gave £11 million to a woman he apparently couldn't ever remember meeting.
I'm interested, though, in this relationship between the Sussexes and Omid Scobie, who calls himself a journalist, but do they know him? Like, what's the backstory, Cameron? Wasn't she friends with him?
Well, Omid does actually describe this in his book, saying that he was just a normal royal reporter on the beat, I suppose a bit like I am and others are now, covering... Not normal.
Much better than normal.
Thank you very much, thank you very much. But covering members of the royal family and meeting their courtiers, and he decided perhaps to side with the younger members of the royal family, and then he said it all changed when Meghan came on the scene, and he decided to perhaps be slightly more sympathetic towards her because he disagreed with perhaps some of the coverage that she was receiving. And then, of course, finding freedom, he found he had a lot of sources, including, it looks like, Meghan Markle, to be able to talk to him to write the book.
So you are a royal correspondent. Is that plausible? Is that an option that you could have been faced with, or you might be faced with at some point in your career?
In terms of having people reach out to me and briefing...
But also then becoming quite clearly one side of the royal family. Like, he's chosen a side here, hasn't he?
He has chosen a side, and he actually says in the book, a senior member of Buckingham Palace said he's chosen the wrong side, he alleges, which is quite a difficult statement. I mean, for me, I'm in broadcast. I try and keep a level head on either side.
And you
clearly
do it
there are
beautifully,
some
Cameron,
people, thank you. But clearly there are some people who favour one side over the other.
Well, this one is going to run and run, as they say, Cameron. and sadly, Bev, it will sell very well.
Yes, probably. Well, maybe. I can think of 3 billion books I'd rather read before that one, I can tell you that.
Cameron Walker is our royal correspondent.
Now, family members of those bereaved by the conflict in Israel and Palestine are to lead a vigil for all of those suffering in the conflict in central London on Sunday, December the 3rd.
Now, the widow of Joe Cox, the Labour MP who was murdered by a far-right extremist during the referendum, understands better than most the toxicity of hate and the importance of building bridges and coming together against violence.
So Brendan Cox, the co-founder of the Together Coalition, joins us in the studio. Lovely to see you, Brendan.
Morning.
Thank you so much for coming in. So tell us what has led to you wanting to host this at the weekend. As we just said there in our introduction, nobody understands better than you do the consequences of when that kind of ideology of hate, the volume raises on it and raises on it. Is that what's led you to this point now, to this vigil this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, I think it came from this upsurge amongst people, which is that the vast majority of the debate is dominated by the loudest, most extreme voices. And in fact, the vast majority of the public in the UK have real concern for a civilian, an innocent civilian who is Israeli, who has been killed, and has got the same concern for an innocent civilian who is Palestinian, who has been killed. And what we're being told time and time again is you have to take a side. There's only one side and the other side is all evil. And in those moments, I guess my concern about it was you whip up this anger, you whip up this hatred. Extremists piggyback on it. They decide, actually, this is the fault of all Jews or all Muslims. And in that context, we know, and I know from my experience, that extremists can do incredibly extreme things. And I'm very worried about the community cohesion in the UK. So what it's designed to do, what this day is designed to do, is to give voice to the vast majority of the public who feel the grief, whether they are Palestinian and Israeli, have no time for anti-Semitism, have no time for anti-Muslim hatred, and want to protect our communities in the UK. We don't need to import the conflict from Israel-Palestine into the UK. And so this is led by families who have lost people in Palestine, led by people who have lost people in Israel, saying, if we can come together, if we can bury our differences and say there can be no room for hate on our streets, then we should all be able to do that as well.
It's a very radical approach, actually, because we've seen in London over the last several weekends, we have these very separate protests. You have the Palestinian protests, where the mood could be described, I think, accurately as a little bit more angry. There have been a few more arrests at the Palestinian marches. And we had the Israeli march at the weekend, which was very peaceful, which ended in a spontaneous, God save the Queen at the end of it. So they have quite a different energy. Two very, very difficult groups of people to bring together, Brendan.
Yes, although I think the vast majority of people, as I say, feel that same sentiment, feel that togetherness in the face of it. And I understand why people are incredibly angry seeing the pictures on the TV screen, seeing your social media feeds. If you mostly follow accounts that might be Israeli, for example, the hostages, the pain of that, the massacre by the terrorists on the 7th of October, if you mostly follow Palestinian accounts, the children who are being killed in the rubble, the anger is understandable. I think what we're trying to do is to say that you can feel that anger, you can feel that frustration, but you don't have to turn that into hatred. You don't have to decide that the other side is evil. You don't have to decide that you hate all Muslims, all Jews. And the vast majority of people don't do that. The vast majority of people feel that empathy and feel that concern. And I think it's something that we can all do something about. I think too often in these moments, extremists piggyback on the grief of people who are suffering, whether they are Israeli or whether they are Palestinians, and try to change that grief into anger and then anger into extremism. And the incredible leadership of the families who are putting together this vigil are saying, enough is enough, not in our name.
It'd be really interesting, Brendan, wouldn't it, too, if there was all-party political support for this? I know this is about family. There is. Well, that's what I was going to ask you about that. So you'll see some senior politicians from all sides at the march?
Yes, I very much hope so. When we put this together, we had Conservative, Labour, Liberal Democrats MPs all speaking at the beginning of it. I think this is something that cuts across political parties. And the reality is we can all have very different views about what should happen next, what you prioritise, how you reach peace in the Middle East. It's not a simple thing that can be sloganised. But even in the midst of that, we can disagree well. We can have those conversations. We can have those debates. We can be angry with each other. But that doesn't mean that anger needs to turn to hatred. And it doesn't mean we need to dehumanise each other.
What did you make of Suella Braverman's comments about the fact that the police operate differently, the Metropolitan Police, with far-right protesters and those who maybe are more sort of left-wing, or in this situation, specifically the Palestinian protesters? Did she have a point?
I'm not an expert in policing. I think it's really important that the police are equal in their approach, and that when they see extremism and when they see terrorism or when they see incitement to violence, they act. I know that in some cases, for operational reasons, they do that after the event rather than in the event because of crowd control, for example. But one of the things I've been saying is that whenever marches like this happen, the organisers have a responsibility to tackle that extremism, because there's always a lunatic fringe that attach themselves to Brexit or to Remain or to Palestine or to Israel. And what the organisers need to do, and what all good people who are part of those causes need to do, is to distance themselves from that. So I've seen, for example, I had a lot of friends who were on the Palestinian marches who were outraged that there were people who were supporting Hamas on them because they are just humanitarians who want the bombing to stop. And I know that there are Jewish people in this country on that march who really took a strong line against Tommy Robinson, for example, trying to hijack that. So I think we all have a responsibility. But what we're doing on Sunday at 3 o'clock at Downing Street is asking people not to bling flags, not to bling placards, but to bring themselves.
And not masks, maybe.
And not masks as well, and to be there together to share the pain of civilians, no matter what their background, what their religion, and to say, not just in Israel-Palestine, but even more importantly, in the UK, we can, as very different people who might fundamentally disagree about what should happen next, we can live together peacefully. And if we don't do that, then the hope of that ever happening in Israel-Palestine is very
It's a real kind of indication, it's a real manifestation, actually, of Jo Cox's legacy, of Jo's legacy, that she was very much about bringing people together, wasn't she? And her famous phrase about people having more in common. How hard is that for you, on a personal level, to keep Jo's memory alive and to keep putting all of your energies into this sort of activity?
Jo and I worked on this kind of stuff before. We worked together when we met. We were working on conflicts around the world. We worked on Israel-Palestine together, in fact. We worked on the Lebanon together. We worked on countries around the world. And in all of that, as you say, what Jo did was to try not to sort of, you know, say on this side, on that side, but actually to try to find those areas where people can agree, where people can have that commonality. And that's not glib. In fact, it's one of the hardest things to do. One of the easiest things to do is to believe a simplistic narrative that the other side is completely wrong and you are completely right. But actually to see that nuance and to find those areas where people can come together, I think that's where the vast majority of the British public are. They're very sensible, very pragmatic. They're not extreme, but sometimes, too often, their voices are drowned out.
She'd be at the front of the march, I'm pretty sure, with you, Brendan, on Sunday for sure. But can I ask you too, some MPs, including Jo's own sister, have had their offices and even their homes targeted by, it doesn't matter which side of the extreme they are, but extremes on both sides. What do you say about that?
I think that people who move from anger around a cause and protesting around a cause to intimidation and to violence need to be addressed by the police. But what they also do is they undermine their cause because what they do is they drive politicians away from engaging with them. They won't listen to those voices. So I think it's counterproductive. I also think in public eyes, it then aligns those that do that with the extremes. And as I was saying, the British public have no time for extremes. So I think we do need to take it seriously because it also means for the long term, it undermines our democracy. If we can't have a safe place for politicians to campaign and to meet their constituents, then we're in danger, I think.
That's what I was just going to say, really. Would you... So I think you've answered my question, which is that you wouldn't want to see greater restrictions on people being able to go to MPs' houses. You know, in America, I think there are some rules around the fact that you can't go to a politician's house and knock on the door like you can here. But you would think that would be overreach. Even with your history, Brendan, of having lost your wife in those circumstances, you still think that would be too much?
I think it's really important that we don't let extremists undermine our democracy. And part of our democracy is enabling people to meet their MPs. I think it's much better to do that at a constituency surgery. I think it's much better to do that at the public events. But there is a risk, there absolutely is a risk, that if that risk becomes too high, then MPs will withdraw from that public role that they have. And that would be a real shame for our democracy, I think.
Yeah.
What's it like, if I could ask, you've got Christmas coming up. How difficult is that? I know you've made a new life now, you have a new wife, but Christmas without Jo must have been very tough for years for you and your kids.
Yeah, it was. I mean, in fact, we've just been going through old Christmas videos of Jo with the kids at their various stages, singing various Christmas songs.
And they were 3 and 5 when you lost Jo.
Yeah, they were 3 and 5. But I think that, you know, I'm very lucky. My kids are incredibly resilient and incredibly still full of Jo's love and her empathy, and they're certainly the thing that has kept me going ever since she was killed. But also, I think that signal of hope. So they don't have a sort of shred of hate in them. They don't harbour a sort of deep and underlying resentment. They treat people as they come, and they I think are and this Christmas we'll just be looking forward, as all kids will be, to what's in what comes down the chimney.
Can I just ask you about, because obviously there'll be people watching this who feel disillusioned with their life at the moment. Maybe people who were born here who see that there were 750,000 net migration last year, who feel that their life is not what it should be, and that people arrive here and they get given a house and they get given benefits and they get put in a hotel, and that's where some of that resentment and that anger comes from. What would you say to those people?
I think people who are angry about the status quo, and I think lots of people are, in many cases right to be so. I think there's lots of things to be furious about in our country, from homelessness to poverty to inequality to injustice. So I think it is totally understandable. The question is how you channel that and what do you do about it. And it is completely legitimate to campaign for change, to campaign in the example that you were giving, to bring down the figures on immigration, to change the way that migrants are assimilated into society. You can campaign for that. It's completely legitimate. What isn't legitimate is to drive hatred against those individuals and to blame whole groups of people for the actions of minorities or for the perceptions of actions of minorities. And as long as we hold that line, I think we can have an incredibly vibrant democracy where people can be passionate, people can actively disagree, where they can want to change the government and want it to have a radical different policy, but still respect each other's humanity. And that is what the vast majority of the UK public do.
Isn't part of the problem, of course, that politics and democracy is dependent on people being divided? Because we have a Conservative Party that's asking people to think one way, and you will have a Labour Party asking the public to think another way, and pitching for that vote on the very basis of the fact that they have to say we are different to that lot. How do we square that in this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big question. It might be above my pay grade, but I think that the way that our political system works, actually, in some ways can be quite positive, because you tend to win politics from the middle in the UK. So when the Labour Party went off to the far left under Jeremy Corbyn, it became unelectable. When the Conservative Party has been off to the far right, it has been unelectable. And therefore, the way our political system works is you have to create those coalitions in the middle and aim for that voter in the middle. And I think what that tends to do is it means we don't sway from one extreme to the other, and I think that's a positive thing. But lots of this isn't about politics, it's about us, it's about what we all do, it's about what your viewers do. And I think one of the most powerful things from this, when we're thinking about the current context, for example, there's two ways that you can respond to this stuff. One is to try and pour petrol on the flames, to say that your side is always right and the other side is always evil. The most powerful thing that I see on social media in particular is when somebody might agree with the cause. They might be a hardcore Brexiteer, but they might challenge somebody when their language goes too far and starts to spread racism. Somebody might be a hardcore Remainer, but another Remainer challenged them when they call all Brexiteers racist. So it's that stuff within our communities. If we all challenge that, if we all enforce good behaviour, that's the thing that will have a real impact on how our politics plays out.
And wouldn't it help, Brendan, if the big media giants, Facebook and the like, cleaned up social media, because it is a cesspit, frankly? And it promotes and spreads hate.
100%. And not just that, I think one of the problems that we often have here is that there are media organisations that not only, in social media organisations, that not only say that they are a platform, but they actively propagate the most extreme views. If you look at the way that the algorithm works, it promotes the most extreme content. If you go onto Twitter now, for example, the most extreme, if you put in Israel-Palestine, it will be the most extreme voices, because they're the ones that get the engagement, they're the ones that get the clicks. And as long as we have that, it's dangerous, because it drives people, it drives the conversation to extremes. Now, having said that, again, the vast majority of the British public are incredibly sensible, and they see those extremes and they don't like them, and they withdraw from it. And you see the vast majority of the posts on somewhere like Twitter are from people that represent a tiny minority of the views. We just need to, as this vigil will, I hope, on Sunday at 3 o'clock outside Downing Street, I hope moments like that will provide an opportunity for the mainstream voices to come to the fore.
I hope you get a huge turnout, Brendan.
Thank you very much.
You deserve to.
It's great to see you.
Really
and we
great.
will put the details of the vigil on the GB News website as well, so people want to go and get the details.
Thank you.
Right. OK, up next, Brits might love tea, but they prefer when it's spilled, apparently. More royal revelations in Amy Scooby's bombshell new book, Endgame.
I'm calling them.
Britain's Newsroom on GB News, the People's Channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this?
Are you rethinking this policy?
Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 10 o'clock on Tuesday, the 28th of November. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce.
Royal Rumble. The journalist Omid Scobie has published his latest book, Endgame. It has some scathing attacks on the royal family. We're going to have the latest.
Truce extended. Israel and Hamas have extended the pause in fighting for 2 more days. Another 11 Israeli hostages, including 3-year-old twins, have been freed by Hamas.
And divided health service, the government's pay offer to consultants in England has infuriated nurses and may provoke more strikes. Our political editor Chris Hope can tell us why.
NHS consultants get 4.95% in January. Will they accept it? And are nurses cross? We'll find out.
Well, I hope people do turn out for that march on Saturday at Downing Street. It's a great idea. The politicians will be there, but they won't be to the fore. Even better.
Yeah, absolutely. Let us know your thoughts this morning. Your emails are coming in as we speak. gbviews@gbnews.com. Let us know where you're watching or listening from as well. And we are going to take you to the pub in Enniskillen with that fantastic Christmas advert that we showed you yesterday. But first, here's your news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Thank you and good morning. 1 minute past 10. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. A further 10 Israeli hostages are due to be released by the Hamas terror group today. It comes as a humanitarian truce was extended for 2 more days. 11 Israeli hostages, including 8 children and 3 adults, were released from Gaza last night. 33 Palestinian prisoners were also released last night. Robert Fox is defence editor for the Evening Standard newspaper. He says freeing the hostages depends upon maintaining the pause in fighting.
Very difficult. Some of the conditions seem to have been absolutely ghastly. And the real question is whether they can extend again. If they don't extend again, and again it's the more liberal wing of the Israeli media, they're speculating that they may not get the remaining hostages out at all.
A planned meeting between Rishi Sunak and the Greek Prime Minister has been abruptly called off. It's understood that Downing Street had been assured that Kyriakos Mitsotakis wouldn't raise the matter of the Elgin marbles, which is a sensitive diplomatic issue for Greece and the UK. Mr Mitsotakis and his team were reportedly left baffled, surprised and annoyed by the sudden cancellation. He was offered a meeting with the Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden instead. However, he opted for a flight home. Shop price inflation has eased for the 6th month in a row as retailers compete fiercely for customers ahead of Christmas. According to the British Retail Consortium, shop prices were 4.3% higher than last November, down from October's 5.2% and the lowest inflation since last June. Food inflation overall slowed to 7.8% from October's 8.8%, the 7th consecutive drop and its lowest rate since last July. That being due to lower domestic energy prices cutting costs, particularly for dairy products. Omid Scobie's bombshell new book about the royal family has been published. Endgame has already reportedly been branded vicious and poisonous by royal insiders. Mr Scobie, who also co-authored a biography of the Sussexes, has said the Duke of Sussex and the Prince of Wales's relationship is beyond repair. He also claims the King, Queen Camilla and the Prince of Wales conspired to undermine Harry and Meghan. Buckingham Palace has not commented on the claims. Royal biographer and broadcaster Angela Levin says she doubts the veracity of the book's claims.
It's beyond revolting. It's so spiteful and nasty, and I'm quite sure that it's full of lies. I think it's his end game, actually. I think people will hate having anything to do with him. Certainly the royal family don't.
The first transatlantic flight in a large passenger aircraft using green fuel would depart Heathrow Airport later, bound for New York's JFK Airport. Virgin Atlantic will operate the Boeing 787 Dreamliner aircraft. Passengers will include Virgin founder Sir Richard Branson and the Transport Secretary Mark Harper. He told GB News that the flight shows we can decarbonise travel.
This is a real step forward for using 100% sustainable aviation fuel for a first commercial-scale transatlantic flight. And this is part of how we get this innovation and technology to mean that we can continue making sure flying is available for everybody, but in a way that protects the environment, which I think what most people want us to be able to do.
Meanwhile, EasyJet has revealed annual profits after a record summer. However, the low-cost airline says geopolitical instability could weigh on the current quarter. It reported pre-tax profits of £432 million for the year to September, against losses of £208 million the previous year. That saw the group announce its first dividend payout to shareholders since the COVID pandemic. And rates of shoplifting are rising fast, with the sharpest increase seen in Conservative constituencies. As part of a pledge to tackle the problem, Labour says it will overhaul current laws to make abuse of shop workers a specific offence. Shadow Policing Minister Alex Norris told GB News the government hasn't taken the issue seriously.
Again, it shows that the decision to cut police was a total disaster. But what we've seen now as those police officers are being added back is that they're often not in the right places. So we're hearing really concerning stories. We see that it tends to be areas with Conservative police and crime commissioners that have the highest rates because there doesn't seem to be the same focus on this. But in this place today, we are discussing legislation about crime and about justice. That is completely silent on retail. That's a real failing. So I will and my colleagues will be trying to add that back into the bill. The government needs to listen, work with us on that so that we can tackle this scourge.
This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now back to Andrew and Bev.
Morning, it's just after 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning. You've been getting in touch at home. Thank you so much for your emails. A lot of you reacting to the interview we just did with Brendan Cox. Clive says, what an amazing interview this morning by Joe Cox's husband. So much common sense spoken. It warmed my heart. John has also said about the vigil at the weekend, which Brendan Cox was on here to promote. He said, no flags, fat chance. It will be a sea of black, green, white and red. Well, that is...
I hope they're wrong because, I mean...
I hope so.
But there definitely shouldn't be any masks.
No, absolutely. And Robert said there is no doubt whatsoever in people's minds that we have two-tier policing. This was because we asked Brendan whether he thinks the right wing, as far right as they're often described, are policed differently. And that's particularly what Suella Braverman said when she was Home Secretary. There's no doubt in my mind that we have two-tier policing. We've seen it with the recent marches and with the BLM marches compared to the marches of patriots who want to protect and preserve our country's values, etc. Controversial and
well, let's hope there's no trouble on Sunday because that would be unforgivable.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a peace rally.
It really is. And also talk about the royal book that well, you might read it. Will you read it?
Yeah, look, I'm a staunch royalist, as you know. I couldn't bear the alternative to the House of Windsor. Could you really bear President Blair?
No.
And First Lady Shirley or President Boris? No, thanks.
But I think you can like the royal family without having to read this load of tosh, can't you?
But it's... and I think, look, it's being described as revelations. I think we should refer to it as allegations, because on what basis do we have this? But it's going to sell well. It's been... The reviews in the United States, where, of course, they would be expected to be far more popular, are already... devastating.
Well, David had said, why did GB News not ask the good people of Sussex if Harry and Meghan are doing a good job of representing them? If you are in Sussex this morning...
Do you want them to be your Duke and Duchess? I'm sure you don't, actually.
No, quite.
But, of course, those titles were in the gift of the late Queen, so they'll stay with them, I guess.
Right, so as we're saying, Endgame. This book has been released this morning. It's the latest biography from the journalist Omid Scobie. There are some scathing attacks on the royal family.
From Meghan's claims of racism to the King's odd ironing habits, the book is packed with gossip. So we're going to talk now to the former royal correspondent of The Sun, the legend that is Charles Ray. Charles, I'm just going to read you a couple of things from the book and get your response. So it says, the King is a flawed father, a philandering husband. He destroyed the life of Princess Diana. Everyone knows he might have preferred life as Camilla's tampon. He was, he's a pampered prince. He's an ageing king. He's unpopular, peevish, jealous of his son and heir. Oh, and he demands flunkies iron his shoelaces. That's in the first 6 pages, Charles. The first 6 pages.
And it goes downhill from there on, isn't it? Some of those allegations, as you well know, Andrew, we've heard before. So there's nothing new in those allegations about him betraying Princess Diana and everything else. But I mean, look, Andrew, you and I have both seen dozens and dozens of royal books come along at various times. Some of them authored, some of them unauthored, some of them just plain made up. I would put this Omid Scobie book in the 3rd category because some of the things he's saying in there are plainly ridiculous. I mean, one brief example. He raises the hoary old chestnut again of a shining light in the Paris tunnel, which resulted in the death of the Princess of Wales. He doesn't mention the drunk driver, and the shining light has been disgraced all the way through.
There was Sir John Stevens, now Lord Stevens, how many pages was that report, Charles, into the death of Diana? 786, and he completely junked comprehensively the conspiracy theories. He was killed, they were killed because that man who was driving the car was drunk and he'd had a cocktail of drugs.
And Omid Scobie also says that William is prioritised his loyalty to the monarchy. Well, shock horror. He's the Prince of Wales, is going to be king. Of course he's going to prioritise his loyalty to the monarchy. He's going to rule it one day. I mean, and the attacks he makes on various people, and particularly the Princess of Wales, I mean, I just find utterly disgraceful. Bev used a great word, which is probably the only one broadcastable, is tosh. The whole thing is complete and utter tosh.
Do you think? Do you think the criticism, the intense, almost misogynistic attacks on the Princess of Wales reflect perhaps what Meghan thinks of her sister-in-law? Because we know this is all coming from Harry and Meghan, because they're the only royals in the book who come out well.
Undoubtedly, that's what Meghan thinks of Catherine. There's no question about that. And just on that point, both the Sussexes and Omid Scobie have said that they didn't cooperate with this book. Now, that's what they said when he wrote Finding Freedom, and then they were forced to admit, yes, there was cooperation. Now, if Harry and Meghan did not directly give this guy quotes, then he went to people who are friends of Harry and Meghan's, and who got authorised by the couple to speak to Omid Scobie. It's the old trick, you know as well as I do. It's the old trick. You can lift your hands up and say, I didn't cooperate, but it's okay, I'll let a couple of people, give a few quotes to him.
We're getting lots of messages from our audience getting in touch saying, Margaret, I certainly won't be reading this rubbish. Kevin, Harry probably says there are 3 people in this marriage, Meghan, Scobie and me. Particularly our viewers, they're not warming to the idea of reading this book. I mean, who reads it, Charles? Who would want to read it?
Well, unfortunately, like Andrew, I'm probably going to have to read it as well. So there will be a market for it. There is no question. There's no question about it. You see, Scobie himself has already said in an interview that the extracts we have seen published in some of the newspapers have all been taken out of context. Well, that is an absolutely incredible statement for him to make, because they were taken from the serialisation in Paris Match, which he authorised. So all of this is just ridiculous for him to say so. And I actually think the British people cannot be conned like this by this sort of book from a man who, in my opinion, I never heard of until about 3 or 4 years ago. So I have no idea what his pedigree is and what he knows about the royals or who he knows in the royals. I'll be staggered if there is anyone in Buckingham Palace or Kensington Palace who's feeding this guy anything.
Does this mean the prospects of any form of rapprochement between Harry and his father and brother is now completely dead and buried, Charles?
Oh, Andrew, it's been dead and buried for some time. Let's not forget that, what was it, 2 weeks ago, we were being told by the Meghan and Harry camp that they would accept an invitation to Sandringham at Christmas. And 2 days later, all this stuff comes out about this book. I mean, I don't know what planet, honestly, Harry and Meghan are on. There is no question that there'll be any reconciliation between Harry and Meghan and other members of the royal family. Can you imagine a Christmas dinner sitting around a table with Harry and Meghan, Camilla, William, Catherine? It's just plain ridiculous. And I know some commentators have been saying, yeah, it's better to be an olive branch. Well, this is some olive branch. It's more like an oak tree.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Charles. Charles Ray there, giving us his brilliant insight into all of that. Other revelations from this book. The Princess of Wales, apparently Catherine is terrified of doing anything other than grinning photo opportunities. Apparently King Charles called Harry a fool over Netflix.
But he's right about that.
I would have thought he called him a little bit stronger than that. And the idea that Charles has to have his shoelaces ironed.
Well, do you know, I read, when I was doing the Royal Bit on the Times 15, 20 years ago, I wrote about that, about how that story wasn't true. What
But
we do know is true. It's the story. On one occasion, one of his aides Michael Fawcett, did put toothpaste on the then Prince of Wales's toothbrush. But to be fair to Charles, he'd broken his elbow or his arm, so he was in a sling.
Right.
And it was, I think it was his right arm, and he simply, I couldn't put toothpaste on my toothbrush with my left hand. I would struggle.
Doesn't he? There is an ironing story. There's a royal ironing story. Who's the royal who takes it?
It's Prince Andrew takes his tattooed ironing board all around the world with him. He does. I've seen it with my own eyes in his suite in Singapore.
It's weird, isn't it? Why would you take your ironing board everywhere? Do you take it on the aeroplane and puts it in?
Yeah, he does, along with his equerry. Has to do the ironing, although he doesn't do much travelling now.
Right, on that bombshell, we'll have a change of gear, but we do want to know your thoughts this morning. gbviews@gbnews.com. Right, so the latest on the Israel-Hamas truce now. 11 more hostages have been released by Hamas overnight and have safely arrived into Israel.
And it comes just hours before the 4-day truce between Israel and Hamas is due to expire. Both sides have agreed to this 2-day extension. Well, we're joined now by, GB News reporter Charlie Peters to give us the latest.
So 11 hostages released last night, 3 of them mothers and 8 children, many of them siblings. A significant step forward as this truce enters its 5th day, as the Israeli side had complained about families being split up. In some cases, though, there have been situations where all of the fathers have been left behind. Some of the fathers of those children released have also been killed on the October 7th attacks. Now looking forward into the next part of this 2-day truce, a list is likely to be released later of the next 10 or 11 Israeli hostages to be released in exchange for 30 more Palestinian prisoners. Last night, one of the Palestinian prisoners released was a 16-year-old called Nufuz Hamad, who had been charged with attempted murder in 2021 for trying to stab to death her neighbour in the West Bank. But questions remain on how they will deliver more of those hostages, Hamas, into the Israeli side. One of the hostages they released last night was a 12-year-old boy, a sign perhaps that they are running out of the women and children that they had promised to release first. Turning our attention now to the future operations. It's likely that if this truce continues further into the week, it could end on Friday. That are the reports coming out of Israel, that the commanders want it to end by then. Last night, Defence Minister Yoav Gallant said that when the fighting resumes, there will be greater force and their forces will be throughout the Strip. At the moment, they're in the north of Gaza City, where they've contained a lot of the territory. But to move further south, they'll have to push past Deir al-Bala, an area they have significantly bombarded, and move into a location in the southern Gaza Strip where there are some 2.3 million civilians. To keep them safe, they've pushed them into the southwest, into a humanitarian camp called Al-Mawazi. It's just 14 square kilometres large. It'll have a population density 40% greater than that of central London. Khan Yunis is also where many of the hostages are likely being kept. We know that Hamas are still holding on to a 10-month-old baby, and there are reports coming out at the moment that Hamas is struggling to locate some 200 hostages that they have kept within the Gaza Strip. There are reports that that 10-month-old baby could be being held by a rival faction such as the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. So the Israeli forces, they need to push south if they are to complete their second objective, which is the destruction of the Hamas military capabilities. However, that'll be a significantly more restricted operation than their first move into Gaza City and North Gaza. That is more open ground and there are fewer civilians. But having moved some 1.1 million into the south and with more heavily restricted urban terrain, that operation won't be the sign that we saw in last month where there were 4 armoured divisions moving into North Gaza. It's likely we'll also see less bombardment. But regardless of what happens next and when this truce ends, it's highly likely that the IDF will be looking to move their forces into that restricted southern territory.
Superb, Charlie Peters. Thank you so much for bringing us that very in-depth, up-to-date analysis of the situation. Now, still to come this morning, the creators of the best Christmas ad. They're going to join us. We played it to you yesterday.
So it means we can play it again.
Yeah, well, yeah, it does.
Get your tissues out. It's going to make you cry if you haven't seen it. It's a very nice advert in a pub in Enniskillen online. Done for
Charlie's Bar.
Not even £1,000.
Yeah. This is Britain's Newsroom. Don't go anywhere. This is GB News.
We're here for the show.
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's on your teeth.
It's on your teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
10:24, you're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So doctors' leaders have struck a deal with ministers that could end the strikes by hospital consultants that have badly disrupted NHS care for months.
Join us now from Downing Street, or from Westminster, our political editor, Chris Soap. Now, Chris, you're in Downing Street, I see. This pay offer to the consultants, I suspect, talk about smashing the inflation barrier, is probably going to upset nurses who settled for a lot less. And if I know our viewers and listeners where their sympathies would lie, it would not be with the consultants. Tell us more, Chris.
That's exactly right, Andrew. Now, the meeting broke up behind me moments ago, the Cabinet. Now, I understand that the Cabinet was briefed about this pay deal for consultants. Let's go over the detail there. It's a 4.95% offer in January, on top of a 6% offer already being paid for this year. That's up to 12% pay rise for consultants, the most highly paid NHS staff. That has not gone down well with nurses, who are getting just 5%, plus a lump sum of £1,655. Now, Mr Sunak, the Prime Minister, says it's a fair deal for consultants and for taxpayers, and crucially for patients, because he knows that 1.2 million operations have been cancelled so far because of the trouble in the NHS all this year. 7.8 million of us waiting for operations on the NHS. That's too great. There's a political need to get this down, because don't forget, one of the PM's targets for this year to bring down NHS waiting lists. Well, that's nowhere near happening. In fact, it's gone up by quite a lot. Nurses aren't happy. Professor Nicola Granger, she's from the RCN, says nursing staff are appalled that ministers have found the political will to offer pay for some of their highest earners in the NHS, while its members are left with the lowest pay rise in the public sector. So you're absolutely right. While viewers might think, give nurses more, the politics might be, let's get those waiting lists down for patients, and that's why maybe the consultants have got a better deal. That's politics, Andrew and Bev.
Chris, and how significant is it that there's a new Secretary of State for Health there who took over in the reshuffle, Victoria Atkins, whereas Steve Barclay had been...
That's right.
The talks with the consultants were completely stonewalled when he was Health Secretary.
That's right. Well, Steve Barclay was known to be someone who's very tough on spending. A former Chief Secretary of the Treasury, he walked out. He's now Environment Secretary, walked out past us. Vicky Atkins, of course, is now the Health Secretary. A new name, new face, a new idea of new way of doing, of new approach maybe to negotiations. We don't know that's the case, but that may be the case. And also, we have had the autumn statement out. More money was found, wasn't it? It may be that some more money was found that way with the gradually, slowly improving economy. But this is politics. They need to get patients treated, get operations done. The consultants hold the key for that. They've got a big pay rise.
What's she like, Victoria Atkins? Chris? You might know her as well, do you?
A bit.
It's a big job. Health Secretary is enormous shoes to fill. What qualities does she bring to that position?
I think she brings a lot of understanding. She's got a nice way with people. She might be less... I'm not saying Steve Barclay is confrontational, but a different way of talking. Often I think that she's got a different touch, a different way of communicating with people. And just, I think, changing the cast list can often unblock intransigent positions, and the government had to do something. So I think it's to be welcomed. It has happened. Let's hope it's not inflationary, as Andrew said at the start there, because what we don't want is inflation to start ticking up. It fell by 2.1%, didn't it, just in October. That gave Mrs Sunak his win on what his target for this year. Let's hope it won't start happening in the new year.
Chris, let me just ask you one more question. Is Rishi Sunak getting into a bit of bother about some marbles this morning as well? And now, hasn't he rejected a meeting with the president of Greece so he doesn't have to discuss the Elgin marbles? Why might he do that?
Well, the idea had been to meet with the Greek Premier about 12:45 today. Now, the Greek Premier had an interview with Laura Kuenssberg on the BBC on Sunday. Number 10 were informed that the issue of the marbles, these Elgin marbles held by the British Museum and their return to Athens, would not be raised. It's a perennial issue going on for decades. It was raised. The Greek Premier said, in fact, it's like having half the Mona Lisa shared between the British Museum and the Louvre, cut in half. That's how it feels for Greek people. That really annoyed the government. Then the Greek Premier met with Sir Keir Starmer last night. Reports in Greece that Sir Keir Starmer is looking for a legal solution to this issue, maybe to lend them out. At that point, I think the Tories felt, well, we'll cut and run. The meeting was cancelled. They offered up Oliver Dowden, the Deputy Prime Minister, and that was seen as an affront to the Greece. And the Greeks went home, and they didn't appear here bearing gifts, to use some more classical issues. We've been shouting at the Cabinet as they've left, have you lost your marbles? Can the marbles come back? It's a classic, some would say, maybe a distracting issue. For me, it shows that the election is full on. The row about the Elgin marbles is a classic election issue. What would a Labour government do? What would a Tory government do? For me, it's a wedge issue for the Tory party, even though a small one.
OK, thank you, Chris. Christopher Hope there, Downing Street. I think Rishi Sunak should have had that meeting. It tells you that he likes to avoid the difficult conversations.
It does reinforce the view that among some people that he can be petulant. And, of course, what the Labour leader is saying is that they could go on loan to Athens, but, of course, a lot of people say once they go on loan to Athens, they never come back.
Well, probably not ours, are they?
Well, we've had them a long time. 1805.
I think they had them before us.
Yes, they did. And of course, you know who's the architect of this plan? It's that man, George Osborne, who was Chancellor of the Exchequer under David Cameron, who is now Chairman of the British Museum. And knowing George as I do, he wants to make a name for himself in history as the one who got the marbles back to Greece. And it's infuriated many of his former Tory colleagues.
Oh, right. Let us know your thoughts. GBviews at gbnews.com. Should we be giving back the Elgin marbles or not? And what does it tell you about the Prime Minister and potentially the future Prime Minister? They are handling it quite differently. I think there's more to that story than maybe just meets the eye. I think Rishi Sunak didn't want to meet him because the headlines will write themselves, won't they, about him losing his marbles.
Losing his marbles, exactly.
Right, closed borders. According to a new poll, the majority of people are in support of a 5-year freeze on immigration.
And talk Trump, get bumped. Have ITV bosses, how dare they, cut our very own Nigel Farage out of the jungle having conversations about the ex-president.
He's definitely getting limited airtime at the moment. That and much more after your morning's news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Bev, thank you and good morning. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. A controversial new book that promises to reveal details about tensions in the royal family hits shelves today. According to reports, Endgame has already been branded vicious and poisonous by royal insiders. Author Omid Scobie, who also co-wrote a biography of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, claims the relationship between Prince Harry and his brother is beyond repair. He also writes that the King, Queen Camilla and the Prince of Wales conspired to undermine Harry and Meghan. Buckingham Palace has not commented. A further 10 Israeli hostages are due to be released by the Hamas terror group today. It comes as a humanitarian truce was extended for 2 more days. 11 Israeli hostages, including 8 children and 3 adults, were released from Gaza last night. 33 Palestinian prisoners were also released. A planned meeting between Rishi Sunak and the Greek Prime Minister has been abruptly called off. It's understood that Downing Street had been assured that Kyriakos Mitsotakis wouldn't raise the matter of the Elgin marbles, which is a sensitive diplomatic issue for Greece and the UK. Mr Mitsotakis and his team were reportedly left baffled and surprised by the sudden cancellation. He was offered a meeting with the Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden instead. However, he opted for a flight home. And the first transatlantic flight in a large passenger aircraft using green fuel will depart Heathrow soon, bound for New York's JFK Airport. Virgin Atlantic will operate Boeing 787 Dreamliner aircraft. Passengers will include Virgin founder Sir Richard Branson and the Transport Secretary Mark Harper, who says it's proof that air travel can be sustainable. For more on all of those stories, you can visit our website, gbnews.com.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2635 and 1.1538 euros. The price of gold, £1,595 and 46 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,426 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Still to come this morning, Charlie's Bar, that pub in Enniskillen, the Christmas video that's taken the internet by storm. It pulls on the emotional heartstrings. What is it that makes a Christmas advert work? We'll be talking about that, and we'll be talking to the person who runs the pub. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this?
Are you rethinking this policy?
Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
(10:37) with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearson Pepton. And now, if you're listening on the radio, we're just seeing live pictures of the Gaza skyline. It looks like plumes of thick, dark black smoke. Now, we are, of course, meant to be on another day of the truce. We don't know what's happening yet. We will try and get information, but that day are very, very disturbing images. And I'm afraid, who knows? We all know that they say in war, first casualty of war is truce.
Well, the ceasefire was expected to last for two more days. So we don't know at the moment what has caused these plumes of smoke, but we will be bringing that to you as soon as we do know.
We'll move on. Now, yesterday on the show, we showed you that heartwarming Christmas ad. It's Bev's favourite Christmas ad ever, from a pub in Northern Ireland that's gone viral. That's right. It tells the tale of a lonely older gentleman who finds company in two kind strangers after their little dog brings them together. Let's just remind ourselves.
Who knows what is hiding in those weak and sunken lines? Fiery thrones of muted angels giving love but getting nothing back. Oh, people, help the people. And if you're homesick, give me your hand and I'll hold it. People, help the people. Nothing will drag you down. Oh, and if I had to bring, oh, and if I had to bring, I'd be cold as a stone and rich as a fool. It turned all those good hearts.
Music gives you goosebumps, doesn't it? That was the potted, shortened version.
Jumps on the old man's legs, and then the couple befriend him, and it's
lovely.
Just lovely.
We're joined now, delighted to be joined now by Charlie's bar manager, Una Burns, and the content creator who made the advert, E-Fatigue. Good morning, ladies. Did you have any idea you were going to cause this sort of sensation and be all over the world as the best Christmas ad in history?
We just, honestly, we can't believe it. We're just blown away by the response.
It's just been absolutely amazing so far. We never ever imagined when we put out that video on Friday that this would happen, and it's just been absolutely magical.
So I'm presuming that's Una talking there. You're the manager of the bar, are you?
No, that's me.
Oh, that's you.
Yeah,
Sorry, ladies. Both gorgeous women on a Tuesday morning. So just tell us then, where did the idea come from for the video?
So basically, we share videos a lot of the time on our social media, and they're normally more lighthearted. And a friend of mine had texted me and said, would you not consider doing a Christmas advert? And so I thought, why not? And I just kind of thought about what Charlie's looks at Christmas time. And unfortunately, it really came to me that it was more the loneliness, and it's a tough time for people. And it's not just as joyful as it may seem sometimes on the TV. And we wanted to portray that. And we also wanted to remind people just to be kind at this time of year and to look out for those who maybe are suffering with grief. So once I had the idea, I knew I didn't have the skill set to actually make it happen. So I got in touch with Aoife and we storyboarded it, and then we got the actors.
Well, they are lovely and it's charming. I mean, there's interest in this worldwide, I gather, ladies. From all around the world, people are getting in touch.
Yes, the response has been incredible. We've had messages from Canada, California, from all over different places in America. It's just been unbelievable, and people just taking the time out of their day to send the most loveliest of messages to us, just saying, you know, it really touched their heart. They maybe have suffered similar situations before, and you know, it's nice to be noticed and recognised, and just thanking us for the lovely video. It's been so lovely.
How quickly did you know it had made such massive impact?
I think it really hit me on Saturday. Friday it was doing well, and we were really pleased with how it was going, but I was actually working bar on the Saturday, and there was a couple that came from Oma down the road from us, about an hour, and they said they'd watched the video and that was why they'd come into the pub. And they said they were so excited. They said, have you seen it? Have you seen it on TikTok? Have you seen the amount of likes it has? And I was behind the bar. I said, no, I'm serving here, I haven't seen. And that's when I think bigger accounts started to pick it up and share it, and my phone just lit up, and I think from then it just took off.
I think I was a similar situation. I kind of had a goal of what we would like to reach, and it was on the Saturday. It was immediate that when I checked my phone, the goal had been passed by miles. So it was the Friday I was still looking at it on my phone going, oh, I hope we get there, I hope we get there. But Saturday it just took off, and it hasn't stopped since.
And the actors, are they thrilled to bits with the response, the three actors, that lovely couple and the lovely old man?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, they can't believe it. And well, they're local people. They aren't actors professionally. One of them, Martin, the man, he does local plays. So they've never experienced this kind of attention before. And they're just loving it, and the wee dog included.
What's the dog called?
The dog's called Missy.
Missy. And how many times has it been watched now, Aoife?
It's hard to keep count, to be honest. Every time I check the phone, it's going up and up, but on all the platforms, it's definitely been watched several million times. I think yesterday we might have been on, was it 10 million watches, Una?
At least that, because I know
yesterday.
It was on 8 point something alone this morning when I checked.
Yeah, so it just keeps going, and it really doesn't seem to be slowing down just yet.
Aoife, is your job, do you make films? Is this what you do normally? Because if not, you're going to be doing it now. Yeah. You're going to be whisked off to Hollywood soon.
Yeah, so earlier in the year, it was actually around St. Patrick's Day, I decided to take the leap and start it off myself. And it was actually Una who offered me my first job to make them a St. Patrick's Day video. And I've just been doing it from March time. And yeah, it's been going well so far.
Brilliant.
Certainly has.
And have you had more business at the pub quickly? Have you noticed an uptick in takings? Because that's what we want with the hospitality industry.
Absolutely. We're seeing people coming through the door, and they're all bringing up the advert, people that we've never seen before. They're even going to the door where it was actually filmed. So definitely, and we're looking forward to a busy Christmas.
Oh, brilliant. Well done.
Congratulations to both of you. It's a terrific story.
Fantastic. Charlie's Bar in Enniskillen, the manager.
And happy Christmas to you all.
Oh, it's too early.
I'm
not saying it. I am not saying Happy Christmas. Nigel Nelson and Tonya Buxton are here. Thank you, ladies. Are we saying Happy Christmas? No, I'm not, Tonya.
Oh, I am, because that's so beautiful.
Because it is.
John Lewis need to learn from that, don't they? Because that's what people want to see. We want to see kindness and love.
Tonya.
Yeah.
£700.
Not a Venus flytrap or whatever they may have.
Is that why it's so popular, do you think, Nigel? Because it's just basic human emotion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole thing is that, apart from just being very moving, which you do kind of well up when you see it, but also as an ad, it must have been one of the most successful ever. Next time I'm in Dublin, I will go to Charlie's Bar, and I'm sure that'll apply to everybody else who's there.
You'd want to see it.
Yeah.
It's in Northern Ireland. It's in Enniskillen.
And lovely that they're local.
Right. Don't go to Dublin then.
He's a local actor, does local plays, probably to an audience of about 43 on a sellout night.
That's going to blow up now, and I love that too, because it deserves to, doesn't it? It really does.
It's fantastic. Right, so what should we talk about, guys? Do we want to talk about this endgame, homage Scooby? I always call him Scooby because he's a bit of a joke figure, really.
Well, exactly. And let's not call them revelations, they're allegations.
They're lies.
OK, Tommy never pulls back.
They're lies. I mean, they're lies to put out there to sell a book, and they're twisting things. Kate is an elegant woman who was aware of what it would mean to become Queen, to be Princess of Wales, and she stepped into that role elegantly and has done it beautifully and stoically, and they're trying to twist that into something else. It's disgusting.
Yeah.
It's almost misogynistic, actually.
It is misogynistic. Absolutely is misogynistic. Yeah.
Attacking her obsession by clothes, the way she looks.
No, because that's part of
lessons.
That's her job,
Yeah.
and she's taken her job seriously. She's following in the footsteps of the Queen, taking this job and her duty very seriously, and doing a fantastic job of it. And what this Scooby-Doo guy is trying to do is to make her look like some kind of puppet, like she doesn't have a brain. She's a mother of three, and I think she's absolutely brilliant, making up nicknames. But when we all made up nicknames. We called her Waity Katie for a while, and now they're calling her Keen Katie or Katie Keen, whatever it is. But what she is actually is practising to be Queen Katie.
Yeah. Will any of these punches land on the royal family? I think it just galvanises people to be in more support of them.
Well, I would rather hope that people wouldn't buy the book on the basis of what we've seen. But we'll see. But obviously, what the author was doing was actually trying to make it so sensational, and that's why these things sell. At the moment, I would have thought that this is where Harry really does have to make a statement.
Yes.
And he ought to say...
Agree. Yeah, I agree.
I think he ought to say that neither he nor his circle had any input into this book whatsoever, and he doesn't recognise any of the claims made in it. That would be the best thing for him, because otherwise the suspicion is he's behind it somewhere.
But he'd have to grow a spine to do that.
But also, this is fraught. You remember when Andrew Morton wrote his book, which revealed the scale of the dysfunctionality of Charles and Diana's marriage. The then director of the Press Complaints Commission, a man called Lord MacGregor of Durris, gave an interview, and he said it's disgraceful the way the Princess of Wales' privacy has been invaded. And it turned out about 3 days later she cooperated.
That's the point.
Fully.
That's the point.
With Andrew Morton.
So what we need to know is, did Harry and Meghan cooperate on this book or not?
Or their circle.
Or their circle, and if they didn't, they ought to say so.
Yeah, and I suspect there will be a deafening silence.
Absolutely. Well, there is. I mean, if they must have seen this book before, and they should have put a press thing
but it matters,
before saying that we have nothing to do with it.
It matters so much, doesn't it, to the Sussexes, what other people think.
Yes,
they are perpetually obsessed with what other people think. And if this is a book that they feel shows them in a positive light when they feel that the rest of the global media shows them in a negative light, they're not going to say it's not true, because they're desperate for people to believe it, aren't they?
But it doesn't. Everything they do, they just don't seem to have a modicum of intelligence between them. And their team doesn't seem to be very intelligent either, because everything they do alienates people. People have they've got onto this kind of Meghan defensive wagon that they say if you don't like Meghan, then you're a racist. And so it's become this other thing. But the reality is everything, if she was a white woman and all the things that she'd been doing, she'd be really, really told off now.
Yeah.
People are tiptoeing about her.
Yeah. Interesting that the New York Times, Nigel, which had been pretty supportive of them, a paper on the left, of course, they've done the first review, and it is withering.
Yeah, well,
of Harry and Meghan, and it says the people who've been damaged here are Harry and Meghan.
Yeah, and I think that's probably true. But the other thing that comes out of this, if there was any chance of a reconciliation, and they've played a part in this, that's all over.
Yeah.
Right, let's move on to this interesting polling. Matt Goodwin, pollster, friend of GB News as well. has done a lot of polling, and it's turned out that 53% of voters would support an immediate 5-year freeze on all further immigration to the UK.
I'm surprised it's not higher.
So that we could better absorb mass migration of the last 20 years. That's altogether is 53%. Brexit voters, 79%. Conservatives, 78%. Labour voters, 35%. Remainers, 35%. Interesting, Tonya. Shows a real, well, it's not really a revelation, is it? But the political division between those who want more migration and those who don't.
Workers, 62%.
Workers, 62%.
I mean, this mass immigration that we've got is just undermining our British workers. It's undermining everything about what we need in Britain. It's completely undermined our trust in our government, first and foremostly. I mean, Brexit, the main thing about Brexit was to get immigration under control so we can have a decent pay for our workers. I mean, of course, we will always need talented people to come in, but those people are not the ones coming into this country. And that's the biggest problem. We will always need brain surgeons and engineers and that type of worker to come in, because you need to keep the brain gap going. But what's happening here is that people are not getting to work, and it can disproportionately undermines the non-graduate work people in this country and the workforces for this country. So I don't know how we're going to stop this, but, you know, it sounds better than Rwanda to me.
Well, not this way.
And what are the other things?
I mean, hang on. How are we going to stop? Because your bloke on the broadcast round the other day, Nigel, Darren Jones, said Labour were going to cut it to 200,000 without giving a single idea how he's going to do it. Well, what is he? Cinderella?
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways you do it is to make sure that British workers weren't undercut by foreign workers.
Yes.
That is one part of it was one part of Labour policy. As far as this particular idea goes, it's completely off the planet. If anyone seriously thought we could do it, you'd end up with GDP would go down, inflation would go up, you'd have longer hospital waiting lists, and universities would be struggling to actually make ends meet, because those are everything is actually interlinked. You can't take immigration in isolation. You've got to take the effect it has on the economy.
But Nigel, universities, for example, which is one of my real bugbears, they're a broken system that's relying on foreign students coming over and feeding them when they are broken. So, you know, maybe if we didn't have all these foreign students coming over, universities would be forced to fix their system.
Well, what about the lack of nurses? 47,000 vacancies in nursing, 150,000, 52,000 vacancies in social care. If you followed this kind of idea and you stopped immigration in its tracks, we would never be able to fill those posts.
So would you carry on at the rate of 700,000 a year, which is
no? I think what you need is don't set a cap on these things. Make the whole thing properly flexible, so you take people in as the economy needs them. So at the moment, most of these figures are being fueled by the health and social care visas, because we need those people really desperately.
And then they bring in several dependents. Yeah. Maybe there should be a limit on the amount of dependents you can bring in if you're coming to work in social care.
Well, I mean, again, that's part of the flexibility thing. It depends on... It's recruiting... It's like recruiting for any job. If you need to attract people there, and that relies on dependents coming in, then that will be part of your package.
But Nigel, if we got some of the people on benefits into work, that would mean we wouldn't need so many people coming in. Then the work shy.
Yeah, well...
And there are plenty of them.
Well, whether there are plenty of them or not, we certainly know that 2 million people are sick and unable to work at the moment who probably would work, but that's where you get NHS waiting lists down. And these are the people who will get NHS waiting lists down because they fill the gaps that exist at the moment.
Isn't part of the problem we have such a long waiting list is because we've had 750,000 people who arrived here net last year, many of them for whom free healthcare is just
It's not free. Hang on, no, it's not free. These people pay over £1,000 on the NHS immigration surcharge to actually access the NHS, so it's not free.
You're never going to convince him, Beverly.
Tonya and Nigel, thanks for now. Up next, we're going to be debating whether there is racism in the royal family based on the allegations in this book. Don't go anywhere.
Good morning, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Plenty of frosty mornings and sunny days for the rest of this week, but there is the potential for for a little bit of snow as well. We could well see some snow later today across northeast Scotland. The showers coming in here turning increasingly to sleet and snow, even to lower levels. The odd rain shower scattered about elsewhere, some grazing the west coast of Wales. The odd one over the Midlands this morning pushing south. But for many, it's a dry and a bright day out there with sunny spells. Wind's a bit lighter than yesterday as well, but it still feels pretty cold across the north, 4 or 5 Celsius here, and a brisk wind blowing down these North Sea coasts, which will bring more and more showers in through this evening and overnight, and they will again have some sleet and snow mixed in for northeast Scotland, but also southeast Scotland, northeast England could see a few snow showers through the night, and it may well turn quite icy as temperatures fall down below freezing. A fairly extensive frost then to start Wednesday. Again, most of us will just have a fine day. Any early morning fog should clear away, as it will do this morning. But we'll continue with the risk of showers coming into eastern England and northern Scotland. And again, some sleet and snow likely to be mixed in with those. For many, though, it's another dry, fine day tomorrow, but if anything, a touch colder. Temperatures only 3 or 4 across the north, maybe 7 to 9 across the southwest. It stays cold through this week, and there is the possibility, that's all it is at this stage, of a bit of snow from these weather fronts in the south.
And still to come, the royal family, are there 2 racists in there? That's what the new book Endgame claims this morning. Meghan told the king that. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 11 o'clock on Tuesday the 28th of November. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
The Royal Rumble. The journalist Omid Scobie has published his latest book, Endgame, and it has, guess what, scathing attacks on the royal family. And he alleges Meghan told the King 2 royals were racist. We're going to have a full-scale debate on whether she's right.
Truce extended. Israel and Hamas have apparently extended the pause in fighting for 2 more days, but live footage currently is showing plumes of smoke rising above Gaza. We're going to find out why.
And Ruth Perry inquest, the 53-year-old head teacher who took her own life this year after Ofsted downgraded her school from outstanding to inadequate. GB News presenter Pip Thompson has more.
Ruth Perry's family have already said she was put under intolerable pressure by the inspection. It was indeed the worst day of her life, they say. The inquest is now underway here at Berkshire Coroner's Office. I'll bring you the latest.
We have a slightly different take on that story, don't we?
Yeah.
Let us know your thoughts this morning. We're going to be discussing that. GBviews at gbnews.com, and let us know where you are watching or listening from. First, though, here's the very latest news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Bev, thank you. 1 minute past 11. This is the latest. A controversial new book that promises to reveal details about tensions in the royal family hits the shelves today. According to reports, Endgame has already been branded vicious and poisonous by royal insiders. Author Omid Scobie, who also co-wrote a biography of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, claims the relationship between Prince Harry and his brother is beyond repair. He also writes that the King, Queen Camilla and the Prince of Wales conspired to undermine Harry and Meghan. Buckingham Palace has not commented. Royal biographer and broadcaster Angela Levin says she doubts the veracity of the book's claims.
It's beyond revolting. It's so spiteful and nasty, and I'm quite sure that it's full of lies. I think it's his end game, actually. I think people will hate having anything to do with him. Certainly the royal family don't.
A further 10 Israeli hostages are due to be released by the Hamas terror group today. It comes as a humanitarian truce was extended for 2 more days. Negotiations are underway for it to be further extended. 11 Israeli hostages, including 8 children and 3 adults, were released from Gaza last night. 33 Palestinian prisoners were also released. A planned meeting between Rishi Sunak and the Greek Prime Minister has been abruptly called off. Kyriakos Mitsotakis met the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer during a diplomatic visit to London, but he was reportedly left baffled and annoyed when his meeting with the Prime Minister was cancelled. It's understood that Downing Street had been assured that Mr Mitsotakis wouldn't raise the matter of the Elgin marbles, which is a sensitive diplomatic issue for Greece and the UK. He was offered a meeting with the Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden instead, but he opted for a flight home. Shop price inflation has eased for the 6th month in a row as retailers compete fiercely for customers ahead of Christmas. According to the British Retail Consortium, shop prices were 4.3% higher than last November, down from October's 5.2% and the lowest inflation since last June. Food inflation overall slowed to 7.8% from October's 8.8%, the 7th consecutive drop and its lowest rate since last July. That being due to lower domestic energy prices cutting costs, particularly for dairy products. The first transatlantic flight in a large passenger aircraft using green fuel will depart from Heathrow shortly, bound for New York's JFK Airport. Virgin Atlantic will operate the Boeing 787 Dreamliner aircraft. Passengers will include Virgin founder Sir Richard Branson and Transport Secretary Mark Harper. Well, Harper told GB News that the flight shows we can decarbonise travel.
This is a real step forward for using 100% sustainable aviation fuel for a first commercial scale transatlantic flight, and this is part of how we get this innovation and technology to mean that we can continue making sure flying is available for everybody, but in a way that protects the environment, which I think what most people want us to be able to do.
Meanwhile, EasyJet has revealed annual profits after a record summer. However, the low-cost airline says geopolitical instability could weigh on the current quarter. It reported pre-tax profits of £432 million for the year to September, against losses of £208 million the previous year. That saw the group announce its first dividend payout to shareholders since the COVID pandemic. Rates of shoplifting are rising fast, with the sharpest increase seen in Conservative constituencies. As part of a pledge to tackle the problem, Labour says it'll overhaul current laws to make abuse of shop workers a specific offence. Shadow Policing Minister Alex Norris told GB News the government hasn't taken the issue seriously.
Again, it shows that the decision to cut police was a total disaster. But what we've seen now, as those police officers are being added back, is that they're often not in the right places. So we're hearing really concerning stories. We see that it tends to be areas with Conservative police and crime commissioners that have the highest rates, because there doesn't seem to be the same focus on this. But in this place today, we are discussing legislation about crime and about justice that is completely silent on retail. That's a real failing. So I will, and my colleagues will be trying to add that back into the bill. The government needs to listen, work with us on that, so that we can tackle this scourge.
And the Met Office has issued a yellow weather warning for snow and ice for parts of the UK. Large parts of Scotland, as well as North East England and Yorkshire, are just some of those affected regions. Residents are being told to brace for potentially hazardous conditions this evening and overnight into tomorrow morning if snow falls and icy patches form. The warning starts at 5 o'clock this evening until 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying Play GB News. Now back to Andrew and Bev.
Very good morning. It's 11:06. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining us in record numbers. We need to say thank you. People like us at this time in the morning.
They do. You're watching us in increasing numbers on TV and on the radio, and you're also getting in touch a lot about this book, Endgame. I love this from Bernadette, who says, regarding Meghan Markle, I've only ever seen her in one programme. She can't act. And she definitely can't act like a royal. She's only after what she can get. I get the feeling from her, that is, me, me, me. The minute she goes out of the limelight, she finds something else to criticise the real royals about.
I think she's a good actress. I will say, I love Suits.
I never saw it, actually.
Oh, you'd love it. It's not aged at all. It's a brilliant series. She's brilliant in it. She should have just carried on being an actress.
Well, she is.
You could say that.
She's acting as a royal, very badly.
Malcolm says, unfortunately for Harry, he was a spare in the royal family and he's now a spare in his marriage, dominated by a wife jealous of Kate's success and popularity.
I think there's a lot in that, don't you?
Well, yes.
And the spare to the heir has been a problem for centuries, decades. And Princess Margaret, as we know, had a lot of issues, didn't she? After her marriage broke up, she had an affair with Roddy Llewellyn and drinking at holidays in Mystique. So, but William and Harry were so close. That is what was the sad thing here.
Yeah.
Bonded by the death of their mother. It's just appalling the way it's ended.
You all enjoyed the interview that we did with Brendan Cox at the start of the show. If you didn't see it, go and have a look at it on the GB News website. He's an amazing man. Obviously lost his wife, Jo Cox, the MP, in that awful knife and gun attack outside of her office, her constituency, 6 years ago. And Virginia has said, what do you expect? He's talking about hate. He wants to have a vigil at the weekend which eradicates hate, brings people together. She says, what do you expect when no one listens to what anybody is saying? This is what causes extremism. Brexit's been watered down, immigration sky high. Nothing is done about it year after year. It feels like nobody ever listens to people. I think you make a really good point.
I do. And also there's a perception too that nothing works in this country anymore.
I don't think it's a perception. I think it's right, isn't it? Yeah. Nothing works.
Yeah, and classic. If you had the misfortune to be at Heathrow Airport on Sunday, which I did, try and get back into no Heathrow Express, no Elizabeth Line,
no,
a limited Piccadilly. You just think you can do your autumn statement charts if it's sugar, but if nothing works,
absolutely. Every weekend the trains, nothing works in London. It's a nightmare as well for the kids, like teenagers. Like my teenager wants to go and see their friends. They just have to drive.
And then we get that advice from the AA: avoid puddles in case your car drives into a pothole. Oh my God! I mean, I held my head in my hands when I read that. I thought, is that how bad it's got?
Medieval England.
Yeah.
And also, we're going to be talking about the Elgin marbles. Tonya Buxton is our panellist this morning. Greek-born. She was very cross about us calling them the Elgin marbles.
She's going to call them the Parthenon sculptures, I suspect. I was actually in Greece on the Telegraph back in 2009, and I interviewed the culture minister in his office in the Greek Parliament, in the Greek government, and he made a very passionate case for them being returned.
Oh. Well, we're going to be discussing that. You've already been saying we've got better things to worry about than the marbles.
I think a lot of people think that.
But anyway, we're going to get onto that a little while later. Right, so first of all, this book we've been talking about, Endgame. It's spilling the beans, apparently, over the royal family, including allegations that Meghan named 2 members of the royal household who she claims took part in conversations about the colour of her unborn child's skin.
So, could the royals be racist? We're joined now by showbiz reporter Stephanie Tecci and anti-racism actress Iman Aitons to debate it. Welcome to you both. You're both very well known to viewers on our programme. Who should we start with first? Stephanie, to you, what do you make about these, we must say, allegations in this book?
Yes, Andrew and Bev, I don't think the royals are racist, because I think, in order to be racist, you need to have specific examples where someone has really attacked the colour of someone's skin or made a very defamatory comment about someone's race. And I don't think that's the case here. I think what's happened from back with the Oprah interview, we've had these unnamed royals who've made specific comments about Archie's skin colour. To be honest, that's more a kind of thing anyone would be kind of, a bit curious to know what colour is the child's skin. Most cases with children when they're about to be born. So I think until we name who these royals are and what these specific incidents are, we cannot say they are racist.
Iman, just respond to that. Is it okay for a royal to have said, I wonder how dark this baby's skin will be?
No. So good afternoon, or good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning to you. Thank you for your point. I appreciate that you said that people need to give specific examples in terms of racism. Well, I'll be honest, with all due respect, I think you're actually referring to overt racism where specific examples are needed, right? So our frame of reference in this country is overt racism, obvious, deliberate forms of racial prejudice. And so this is why it's quite easy to lead with the rationale, which is I need to have a very clear, cut, amazing, obvious example of racism. So I think what you're actually referring to, Stephanie, is overt racism. I think in this particular context, we're actually talking about 2 things: covert racism and internalized racism. So now covert racism, as you know, you've heard the microaggressions. Stephanie, I've seen you about, about the term microaggressions, right? They're flying about all day, every day. And the reason why is because it's a normal thing, right? We just get these kind of subtle behaviours in regards to racial prejudice. So I don't think you need anything obvious and clear cut, because covert racism is very subtle. I think that's what we're referring to. And in terms of internalized racism, it can actually be broken down into 3 points. So firstly, colorism, right? Stephanie, I'm going to talk to you on a real basis right now. Black woman to black woman. Tell me if I'm wrong. Honest to God, tell me if I'm wrong. Colorism, which is basically the idea that certain skin tones are more desirable than others. And this is, in terms of context, connected to slavery, connected to colonialism, connected to racism, connected to the house Negro and the field Negro. So I want you to appreciate this is a very similar dynamic that we're dealing with now in terms of colorism. So the colour, in terms of what I'm trying to say, let me just finish, please, I'll keep it quick. In terms of what I'm trying to say, there are black people in my family. For example, I have many mixed race people in my family, and no one on the black side spoke about colour or skin tone my cousins were going to be. It's only white people that actually did it. And the reason why is because if it's not an issue, you won't talk about it. If it's an issue, you'll talk about it. If you have racial prejudice and if you appreciate that colorism leads to privilege and white privilege and light skin privilege and pretty privilege and texturism.
Okay, Stephanie, let me, Iman,
right?
nicely explained. Let me just ask Stephanie to pick up on that point then, that perhaps these royals, unbeknownst perhaps to themselves, as they're culturally conditioned in that environment as well, they were making a statement that was related to whether that child would be more valuable or less valuable based on the amount of melanin in their skin.
No, I don't think that's the case. I totally understand what you're saying, Iman, in the sense of colorism. That's even an issue that plagues among Black people. That's even within our own family. So I refuse to label that as racism, because that's a mindset that has developed so many years and generations about how light a child's going to be, how dark a child's going to be. In terms of the royals, ignorance has been blitzed. We can't say that the royals haven't gone through a lot of changes over the last few years where they're addressing when it comes to race relations. But my problem is calling people racist very loosely is a problem, because then when we do have real incidents of racism out there, people won't take it seriously when we try to bring it down to these kind of minute situations. It's not fair. It's not fair we don't know who the royals are in question, and it's not fair to be branding racism when we need to really define what is a racist. We can't be just using that terminology.
Definitely, you're being very emotional right now, with all due respect. With all due respect, you are. You are. You not present it really well. I'm going to break it down to you if you don't mind. I've heard you. I've genuinely heard you, and I do apologise. I did interrupt you several times. And you are polite to me.
Go on, Iman. Pick up on that point.
I just wanted to interject. Let me just say something real quick, Bev. You've spoken about it in terms of generalizing. We keep using this frame of reference in terms of racism, and you keep kind of leading with this thought that racism is overt, obvious, deliberate, direct forms of racial prejudice. That is not racism in this country, Stephanie. That is not the prevalent form of racism in this country. I can give you facts. I know we haven't got time, so I'll just keep it brief. You need to open your mind. With all due respect, open your mind. It's not about obvious forms of racial prejudice. Is now about subtle forms of racial prejudice, and Black people internalize that racial prejudice, and they now start talking about, I wonder what colour my child will. If she's light skinned, if she has long flowing hair, you're wearing a weave, Stephanie. With all due respect, you are wearing a weave. There was something in your mind that said, I'm going to put on white people's hair right now. I've been there. You saw me with my blonde wig during Black Lives Matter. I've been there in terms
Iman, let's just bring Stephanie in. Just 1 second. This only works. You both have valid opinions. You both have valid opinions. This only works if we hear them. My issue, Stephanie, when I'm hearing Iman talk about subtle microaggressions and a sort of subconscious racism, you can never defend yourself against allegations of racism if it's coming from a place of being accused of being, because whether something is a microaggression or whether it's subconscious is entirely subjective, and therefore you cannot defend yourself against it. Stephanie, go on.
Well, this is what my problem is, because she's saying my problem is that I'm talking about overt racism. Overt racism is when I can have facts. How can you judge someone about internal racism? What is your facts on someone's thoughts or feelings? Then we can all be accused of racism, not just white people, Black people too. We need to have real evidence before we're going to start branding people racist. It's not fair. I'm a Black woman, trust me, I've been through racism experiences, but if I'm going to call someone a racist, I better have the facts. I better have facts of what they've said to me and when. If someone has some discrimination against me...
Go on, Iman. Just respond to that.
Yeah, no, sorry, I'm coming out of frame. I do apologise. Stephanie, you're getting me all excited right now. No, I fully agree with you. So I appreciate everything you just said is accurate. I'm not going to negate what you just said. Spot on. I'm there with you, sis. I know Andrew feels me and I know Bev feels me. You need to have facts, right? We had this conversation. If you're going to say something, let's not live in the world of delusions and entitlement and fabrications and all of these things that are ultimately leading to extreme wokeism. Let's not lead with that. I agree with you. You need evidence. But this is what I also want to say. say in terms of nuanced life, right? We know that everything isn't black and white, isn't left or isn't right. There's so many kind of grey areas, and this is what we need to take into consideration when we're talking about racism. So if we're going to talk about covert racism, I agree with you. You need evidence, but you also need to take in consideration that covert racism is the reason why it's so prevalent within our society, because it's subtle and you don't need evidence. So therefore you can get away with it, perpetuate it within your organisation, perpetuate it within your institution, and no one can check you. Why, Stephanie? Because of what you just said. You need clean-cut evidence. You don't. Not when it comes to covert racism. And this is why we transitioned from 1998, the Human Rights Act.
Imam, we're going to go back to Stephanie.
Imam. Go on, Stephanie.
At the end of the day, we are all human, and we can all be guilty of having some forms of discrimination or racial thoughts. We're now in this generation where we can speak about these things openly, but at the moment you have to understand, especially with the royals, which this debate is about, some of them come from a very old school mindset where now when we're moving to this new modern monarchy, they have to be addressed on these issues. But calling them racist, I think that's a bit too far. I think they do need to address their attitudes and their mindsets to people of colour, as we've seen in the past. But to them rebranding them racism, I just think it's a bit too harsh. And I think the stuff that you're complaining about, black people can be equally criticised for such issues.
Go on, Iman. Last word to you.
I agree. You have to add context. Sorry, I know we've running out of time and you've gotten used to me. I can talk for days. Stephanie, you have to add the context. 270 years of every king and queen within this country advocating for the enslavement of Africans and colonisation of these Africans. We're talking about from Elizabeth I to James IV. This is a fact. 270 years of advocating for subjugating, oppressing black people in Africa. And we're not even talking about colonialism, right? We're not even talking about what's going on right now. We're just talking about 400 years ago. So you cannot talk about these things without adding context. If you're going to talk about racism within the royal family, you need to think about context. You need to think about colorism. You need to think about texturism, hair. You need to think about assimilation, the amount that's or the degree in which black people are willing to assimilate. And this is why we have a frame of reference that we do in terms of overt versus covert. And we also need to take into consideration, if we're going to talk about racism in this country, you have overt racism, which is obvious, deliberate and direct, and you have covert racism, which is subtle and
much harder to prove. And much harder to prove. Iman Aitan, Stephanie Tetchy, great debate. Thank you so much, ladies. Thank you so much. And do you know what we need more than anything? An ability to listen to each other.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
what we need.
And the Queen, I have to say, cannot be a part of that 270-year history of royals advocating the enslavement of black Africans, because she was a fantastic head of the Commonwealth, which is a very largely black organisation. Well, a lively debate. I kept out of it.
Well, I know, I noticed. But do you know why? I could barely get a word in edgeways either. Right, still to come, more on those plumes of smoke that we saw in Gaza in the last half hour. This is meant to be during the truce, which has been extended for 48 hours. We're finding out what's going on. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
11:25, you're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So plumes of smoke could be seen rising above Gaza this morning, even though the warring parties have agreed to extend their truce by 48 hours.
It comes after 8 children, an 18-year-old woman and 2 mothers were released by Hamas overnight and they've safely arrived in Israel. So in the studio with us now is our GB News reporter, Charlie Peters. Clearly, Charlie, great concern that the truce may have broken down. Could there be an alternative explanation?
Well, the Qataris this morning have said that there are minimal breaches taking place to the truce in Gaza, so they're not particularly concerned about the situation. I think what's likely to have happened this morning is that some of the other warring factions on the Palestinian side, let's not forget there are lots of other terrorist groups in the Gaza Strip beyond Hamas, likely weren't communicated on the situation with the extension of that truce last night. So it's not just Hamas, there's also the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Popular Resistance Committees, the Popular Front for Liberation. There are so many other terrorist organisations in the Strip, many of them aligned to Al-Qaeda, and there's a realistic possibility that they have launched attacks on Israeli troops today, thinking the truce is up, and that the Israelis have responded with some shelling or tank fire. No jets heard overhead in the Strip this morning. And why might they have been failing in that communication if that is the reasonable explanation? Well, the Israelis have killed quite a few terrorist commanders over the last 50 days. So the command and control aspects of many of these organisations will have suffered greatly due to the extensive bombing and troops on the ground operations that we've seen since last month.
We're still expecting more hostages to be released tonight, Charlie, at least another 11 from Gaza.
Yeah, there's continuing diplomacy going on today. We've just heard in the last 10 minutes that the CIA and Mossad chiefs, Mossad is the kind of Israeli MI6, are in Doha right now meeting with the Qatari Prime Minister, likely to get a better understanding of the intelligence picture of the situation inside the Gaza Strip with those hostages, because we don't know how many are left. Last night, the Palestinians released a 12-year-old boy, which could be a sign that they're running out of women and children to release in exchange for more high-value Palestinian prisoners. And let's not forget, it's in Hamas's best interest to keep this ceasefire going on for as long as possible, because they know that when it ends, those Israeli forces in the north are going to turn their attention south. And last night, the Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant, warned that they would attack with greater force.
So it will escalate?
Almost certainly. But there are severe restrictions to any potential Israeli operation in the south. The terrain is more heavily restricted. They've got to cross a river, and there are 2.3 million civilians in that location. It's not going to be the kind of armoured tank approach we saw.
And Hamas will be obscuring themselves within those civilians.
There is all sorts of cover, concealment and obstacles they can deploy. They can take off their uniform and put it back on as they wish. And of course, let's not forget, there is that labyrinth of tunnels underneath the strip, all the way down to Khan Yunis and Rafah right in the south. It's going to be more of a bloodbath again.
You know, one of the worst stories and one of the worst images from this conflict is this youngest hostage. This is a 10-month-old baby. Kafir, I believe the name's Kafir Bibas, and he was kidnapped along with with the parents, Jordan and Shuri, and two sons, Ariel, who's 4, and this baby that was 10 months, or is 10 months at the time. And now we're hearing that the baby has been given from Hamas, been given by Hamas to another terrorist organisation.
Almost certainly with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And so in the last 48 hours, we have had significant reports of Hamas scrambling throughout the Gaza Strip, trying to get their other organisations, aligned terror groups, to bring forward any hostages, because they've distributed them, it appears, throughout the Gaza Strip. And when suddenly the attention turns to diplomacy and these exchanges, they have to centralise them again and get them back under Hamas control. This 10-month-old baby should be one of the first hostages that they release according to the order of priority. Really appalling to think of hostages in that way. But that's what it's likely gone missing as it stands.
Awful.
We've got to go, Joe, because there's some breaking news. We can take you live to Heathrow Airport now, where the first ever transatlantic flight in a large passenger aircraft using green fuel, effectively cooking oil, is departing bound for New York's JFK Airport. It's Virgin Atlantic operating the Boeing 787 Dreamliner aircraft.
Now, if I was on this aeroplane, I would have my fingers crossed, because, of course, this is history-making, but this aeroplane is effectively driven by cooking oil. Passengers include Virgin founder, of course, Sir Richard Branson.
Well, it's olive oil or corn oil? Is there a difference?
No, I don't think it's olive oil. That would be quite... I think it's the remnants of cooking oil. I mean, look, you can tell this is not our specialism, is it? Transport Secretary Mark Harper is on the plane.
With Richard Branson.
He says it's proof that air travel can be sustainable. So we are just watching.
Yeah, it's actually taxiing, we think, up the runway, this plane. What would you want to be on that plane? Would you be a bit nervous?
I'd be, well, yes, I suppose so. I mean, I presume that they've... I don't think they're just testing it for the first time.
Well, and is it all... or is it all cooking oil?
Well, it's what they're calling...
SAF, isn't it?
Do you know anything about this, Charlie Peters?
It's some special aviation fuel.
Right.
But Harper's going over to LA after this, or San Francisco, I think, because they've got a bit of a problem in terms of getting the funding for this stuff, because it's not necessarily economically viable at the moment. It's quite expensive to fly a plane on cooking oil.
I'm sure.
And so I think you can have the biofuel to make up a portion of the fuel supply, but to go 100% like this is a big cost.
And actually, cooking oil is one of the food products that soared in price after the war in Ukraine.
It did. So I found some facts. Okay, so this is about us decarbonising. You can tell we're winging it, no pun intended. Airlines are banking on this fuel made from waste. It's going to reduce emissions by up to 70%, apparently, meaning that they can keep operating electric and hydrogen-powered air travel in decades to come. This is the Virgin Boeing 787, powered by Rolls-Royce Trent 1000 engines. It's going to be the first time a commercial flight has flown long haul on 100% SAF, as you say, sustainable aviation fuel. No paying passengers on board.
No cargo either.
No cargo.
Nice and light.
Yes.
It's a bit suspicious if they say, you can get on for free. It comes the day before, of course. We've got the COP28 climate talks going to be happening in Dubai on Thursday.
Right. And we can just see it hedging up the runway. But I mean, this is Richard Branson, the master of self-publicity.
Apparently, it is a blend of traditional kerosene, but also cooking oil. Aviation accounts for an estimated 2 to 3% of global carbon emissions, and it's a key to reducing those emissions, but it is costly, as Charlie said, and accounts for less than 0.1% of total global jet fuel in use today.
Fascinating. Now,
corn.
Still to come, has Sunak lost his marbles? We're going to be talking about that after the Prime Minister cancelled a meeting with the Greek Prime Minister as a row erupted over, we're going to have to call them the Parthenon sculptures, otherwise we're going to get into a lot of trouble with Tonya
Buxton.
Coming in.
Have I got booze for you? BBC is under fire for hiring Guz Khan as the host of Have I Got News for You this week after calling Israel genocidal.
Don't the BBC ever get it?
They don't.
Do they ever get it?
That and much more after your morning's news with Tatiana.
Thank you and good morning. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. A controversial new book that promises to reveal details about tensions in the royal family hits shelves today. According to reports, Endgame has already been branded vicious and poisonous by royal insiders. Author Omid Scobie, who also co-wrote a biography of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, claims the relationship between Prince Harry and his brother is beyond repair. He also writes that the King, Queen Camilla and the Prince of Wales conspired to undermine Harry and Meghan. Buckingham Palace has not commented. Well, we can take you live to Heathrow Airport now, where the first transatlantic flight in a large passenger aircraft using green fuel is departing that airport any moment now, bound for New York's JFK Airport. Virgin Atlantic is operating the Boeing 787 Dreamliner aircraft. Passengers include Virgin founder Sir Richard Branson and Transport Secretary Mark Harper, who says it's proof that air travel can be sustainable. And a planned meeting between Rishi Sunak and the Greek Prime Minister has been abruptly called off. It's understood that Downing Street had been assured that Kyriakos Mitsotakis wouldn't raise the matter of the Elgin marbles, which is a sensitive diplomatic issue for Greece and the UK. Mr Mitsotakis and his team were reportedly left baffled, surprised and annoyed by the sudden cancellation. He was offered a meeting with the Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden instead, but he opted for a flight home. A further 10 Israeli hostages are due to be released by the Hamas terror group today. It comes as a humanitarian truce was extended for 2 more days. 11 Israeli hostages, including 8 children and 3 adults, were released from Gaza last night. 33 Palestinian prisoners were also released. For more on all of those stories, you can visit our website, gbnews.com.
For exclusive, limited edition and rare gold coins that are always newsworthy, Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2635 and €1.1532. The price of gold is £1,595.53 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,430 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Still to come this morning, Jacob Rees-Mogg says that mass migration will cost the Tories the next election. Is he right? This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new
It's your new t-shirt. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
(11:40). You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
The full inquest begins today into the death of Caversham Primary School head teacher Ruth Perry.
She was 53 when she took her own life, which followed a critical Ofsted report which downgraded her school from outstanding to inadequate.
So we're joined now by reporter Pip Thompson in Reading. Good morning, Pip. Just remind us about the details of this story.
Well, Ruth Perry, she was the head teacher of Caversham Primary School. She had, apologies for the idiot behind me, I'll try and continue. She had worked at the school for 17 years and been a head teacher there for about 13 years. She took her own life, we understand, after this Ofsted inspection, which her family have previously said was the worst day of her life. The school had been rated outstanding, but she understood that they were then going to rate it inadequate. Her family have already said that she was put under intolerable pressure because of that inspection. Now, what we've heard at this inquest so far at Berkshire Coroner's Office is how Ofsted inspections work. And schools are judged on 5 criteria: the quality of the education, behaviour and attitudes, personal development, learning, management, early years provision, and then they're graded from outstanding to inadequate. So that would be outstanding, good, needs attention, and then inadequate. There's also safeguarding that's considered, and that could be effective or judged ineffective by Ofsted. Now, if a school then is judged, and I hope you're still with me on this, if a school then is judged inadequate or ineffective, then it's found to have serious weaknesses. And if Caversham Primary School's case, it could have led to it being closed or turned into an academy. So that is what an Ofsted inspector has been telling the coroner so far.
OK, thank you very much, Pip. Pip Thompson there in Reading, Caversham Primary School. I have to say I have a bit of a problem with this story. Tragic. Awful.
Oh, yeah.
Awful for her family, awful when anyone takes their own life. But to have Ofsted dragged into it like this is completely to neglect what other psychological issues would have been going on in that woman's life. It's like if you topped yourself, don't.
No.
But if you blamed if people said, well, it's very stressful working at GB News, what do we do?
Working with you, especially.
You know, what do we do? Do we close down GB News? Like, should your inquest be about me and the culture at GB News?
We all know that it's an incredibly complex issue.
It really is.
There are a number of factors. This woman was stressed by doing her job, but lots of people get stressed doing
exactly that. I mean, I remember having Ofsted investigation when I was not investigation, they were kind of watching our school when I was a primary school teacher. It is stressful.
Yeah.
But, you know, what job isn't stressful?
Yeah.
You have to have stress, but it's her capacity to be able to deal with the stress.
And frankly, as parents, we need Ofsted analyses to be stressful.
Yeah, but I do think that Ofsted has changed over a period of time. So at the moment they're going into a school for a couple of days. What the head teachers argue is that's not enough to actually assess a school. They spent a lot longer there previously and sent more inspectors. So what tends to happen is teachers do get terribly stressed out because they're so reliant on this final verdict, and they don't feel they get to know the school properly while they're doing it, so the verdicts aren't always right. So I think Ofsted does need to re-look at itself in the way it does it.
Is that cost-cutting?
Yeah.
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 And that, do you know what? And that might be a valid investigation that needs to be done into whether Ofsted is fit for purpose, but to drag it into an inquest into somebody's death, I think, is a completely...
Well, I think the coroner's verdict will be very interesting.
Yes, I mean, that might spark some kind of review of the way Ofsted operates.
Because the coroner will make a statement, I imagine, too, with the verdict.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, he said on this channel last night that mass migration could cost the Tories the next election during the day. Here's a clip.
The question of mass migration could cost the Tory party the next election. Mass migration is not the norm in our history, it's the exception. And never before has there been such a large movement of people. And there's no reason to accept this as the status quo. Net migration stands provisionally at 672,000 for 2023, and this when we've got a government that promised to get the numbers down into the tens of thousands, and it lets down an electorate that has given repeated mandates to get the numbers under control.
Nigel Nelson, what do you make of that?
Well, if you actually base migration on a numbers game, then you don't take in all the various other things that help out. So what the Tories are saying is we've got to get the numbers down, got to get the numbers down. You shouldn't really think in those terms. Yes, of course the numbers should come down, but you should deal with it in a way that's flexible. So at the moment we desperately need nurses, 47,000 of them. We desperately need care workers, 152,000 of those. If you start messing about with that, like, for instance, making wages go up, that'll increase the cost on the NHS. Do you want to pay more taxes? And so it goes on. So the whole thing is that you should naturally be able to bring it down by getting more people off benefits and into work, which is the right thing to do, and especially cutting NHS waiting lists to get more sick people who are waiting back into work too.
Tonya, do you know what? This makes me think about the statistics from Matt Goodwin that we were looking at earlier. I'm just trying to find them now. Because the distinction between the people who, and you pointed out, workers who want us to have a cease on...
63%.
Thank you. 63%. Compared to professionals, which was about 30%. Now, why is that? Professionals often rely on cheap immigrant labour to run their multi-million-pound corporations.
They absolutely
and unfortunately, we've got a couple of technocrats running the country, and maybe they just don't care, and they quite like cheap labour to help their family businesses.
And they just don't care about... They don't care about the British people, and that's the thing that we've got to take on board. Yes, we do need nurses, and we do... Actually, you know how I feel about the NHS. It completely needs disbanding and re-putting together because it's broken, it doesn't work. That's why it's not efficient. But we do need nurses and we do need care workers, and that's fine. And there should be a caveat for that. But we don't need over 700,000 people coming into this country. We need to cut immigration. There is not enough. People can't get dentists, they can't get doctors, they can't get their kids into school, and that is what we need to do.
Get parking space.
And also, we're losing the feeling of Britain. You know, we have to have a cultural feeling of Britain. I am of Greek origin, OK? My parents are Greek Cypriot. They came over, they worked hard, they integrated into Britain. You wouldn't necessarily know I was Greek, apart from the fact that I use my hands a lot.
And you're an excellent cook.
And I can cook. You know, but we've integrated and we've added to the society in Britain. And we've got to make sure that the people that come into this country do that too. And I think we need to have a complete reevaluation of how people come in. And those, in particular, going to stay have to say allegiance to the Crown and to Britain.
And there are issues of social cohesion just because
There
of that.
really are. There really are.
And don't you agree with that, Nigel?
Yeah, I do, especially the north of England.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying there aren't problems with this, and the whole integration issue is always a tricky one, because if you set up enclaves of people from elsewhere and they don't get on with the next door enclave, we've had race riots that have got nothing to do with white people. There's been race riots between different ethnic groups.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do agree with that. It's just this idea that seems to be in people's heads. We must bring these numbers down.
We must.
Well,
it's in my head.
But you can do all those things, but they're not. But are people prepared to go along with the knock-on effects of doing that?
We have to get more people back to work who are on benefits.
I agree with you. But then we must cancel then the 20% discount for foreign workers, because obviously people are going to want to employ cheaper labour. That's what bosses do, try and get wages down. If you get rid of that, that would actually help. But there's a knock-on effect there. Food prices have gone up 30% since 2019. About 7% of that is to do with the fact we can't get foreign workers in.
We're going to go to Heathrow now, where this plane is taking off.
With the cooking oil.
This is the Virgin Atlantic Boeing flight taking off. Richard Branson is on there.
With the Transport Minister, Mark Harper, if he walked into this building, nobody would recognise him because he's so useless.
You know, this is nothing new. This is nothing new. As I said to you before, like my uncle, who was a priest, used to do this in his Volkswagen van 10 years ago.
Prince Charles has a little sports car, likewise.
The plane...
It's taking off.
It's taking off. It's being fuelled by this SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuel. This, ladies and gentlemen, might be a glimpse of your future right here. Tonya's uncle used to run his van on chip fat 10 years ago, but this is what it leads to. Richard Branson is on that flight. I mean, he's showing off, really, isn't he?
It's up in the air.
From what we can see, so far, so good. If I was on there, Nigel, I'd have my fingers crossed a little bit. I'm sure it'll be fine.
I always have my fingers crossed when I take off.
Very large gin and tonic, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I don't quite think that it is flying on chip fat, by the way. I think this is actually slightly more sophisticated than that.
It is slightly. It is a sort of. It's a byproduct of cooking oil.
My uncle, when he had his Volkswagen van, that's what he used, and he used to kind of try to avoid the police. He was a priest, and he said God forgave him, so the police will have to too. And he would drive, and that's what we should be doing for sustainability. We shouldn't be telling people you can't travel, you can't see the world, you can't live your life. We're clever enough to come up with renewable fuel like this. It's not going to affect anyone. And using that.
Very expensive.
So in here is corn grain, oil seeds, algae, other fats, oils and greases, agricultural residues, forestry residues. These can all be cooked up together.
But are there any chips in there?
That's the question. Listen, instead of poisoning humans with all those seed oils that we've got in processed food, let's put them to fuel planes.
Yeah, very good idea. Well, fascinating. Well, that's we will keep up to date on that flight when it lands.
It's going to New York.
Do you think it smells of chip fat? I mean,
that's what I'm thinking. Like when you walk past the Expo of the pub.
Yeah, it does.
Listen, where it's not going to Greece.
And did you hear what Beverly Turner just said? She said the Elgin marbles, despite
Beverly Turner.
I've annoyed my mate Tonya down
Beverly Turner, if you want to be my friend, we don't give something the name of the person that raped it from the country.
Oh.
OK, so John Bruce, who took it from the country. It's so wrong. Can I just explain it to
Please
people? A lot of people don't understand. So imagine, let me paint an example, and I'm taking this argument directly from Stephen Fry, who I adore, who really does believe that the Parthenaik marbles and friezes should be returned to Greece. So can you imagine during Nazi times, if the American ambassador went over to the Nazi ruler of Holland, went over to the Dutch Nazi ruler and made an agreement to steal, I don't know, Rembrandt's Night Watch, for example. And so that's fine, is it? The Dutch were under occupation by the Nazis. The Americans came and bought something from the Nazis, and yes, that's fine. Take it off and off you go. Is that reasonable? Because that's what happened in Greece.
Right.
OK. John Bruce, Lord Elgin, came over and made a deal with the Ottomans. He made a deal with the Ottomans and he took the marbles away. Now, originally, the Greeks were happy with this because it would save the marbles. So if for example, you had a fire, Bev, and you said, Tonya, take my paintings, put them in your loft and look after them because my house is burnt down.
Yeah. Right.
2-3 years later, your house is fixed. You say, Tony, can I have the paintings back? Ah, no, mate, can't have those. They're mine now.
Yeah.
That is the exact example. This is to make it really clear and really simple. That is the example.
So, and it's... You wouldn't accept even the idea of them going back on a loan? You said they've just got to go back.
Well, you know what? Let's get them back on a loan and then... and let's see what happens.
Yeah, right.
And it's so disrespectful of Rishi Sunak not to meet Kyriakos Mitsotakis. I mean, it's very odd. It's very... bad
politics.
You know, Rishi is a small man in stature. He's a very small man in stature, and he's just made himself even smaller.
Don't look petulant.
Well, it sounds like he's put his head in the sand and doesn't want to have this conversation in case it reflects badly on him.
I mean, it's nonsense, because the way these things work is that if the Prime Minister goes to a country which has got a bad human rights record, there's a deal whereby you say, we don't like you cutting your citizens' heads off. The Prime Minister is told to mind his own business. They've done the diplomatic bit, but he's raised the issue, and after that, they get on with the real business of the day. To turn round to the Greek Prime Minister and say, well, I'm not going to see you now because you said something on the telly about the Elgin marbles.
And he could have talked to him about common issues about migration.
Migration being the top issue there. They've got to talk about Gaza, they've got to talk about Ukraine. It's quite ridiculous he's behaved the way he has. It's raised the issue up now, because we're talking about it.
We have covered so much in the show today, Tanya and Nigel.
What are they called?
Thank you so much. They're called the Parthenon Sculptures. You prefer sculptures?
Friezes and sculptures, yes.
Excellent. You see, there's our learning point for today. That's it from Britain's Newsroom. Up next, Good Afternoon Britain with Tom and Emily. We'll see you tomorrow.
See you then.
Yes, coming up on Good Afternoon Britain, more royal bombshells. We've got this new book out today that accuses the royals once again, not one royal, but two royals, of being racist. More comments about Archie's skin tone.
But also, this morning we've been seeing Michael Gove before the COVID inquiry. And a fascinating moment happened where he raised the prospect of COVID being man-made. As soon as he said that, he was slapped down by the COVID inquiry lawyer. Should we be asking these questions? We'll be speaking more to that coming up after this.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Turning colder again today and staying pretty cold throughout this week. Most of us dry and bright, a bit of sunshine out there, but increasingly we are seeing some wintry showers across the northeast. Snow mostly on the hills today, but later this evening and tonight we could see some down to lower levels. A few scattered rain showers across West Wales and around the coast of Northern Ireland, but most areas dry and where we see some sunshine, temperatures struggling up to 7 or 8 Celsius across the south. Most places further north 4 or 5. It does feel pretty cold. It'll turn cold fairly quickly again through this evening as